Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
In our small industrial town, my grandmother broke barriers that many thought were unbreakable. As the first woman to head the Department of Inspections and Quality Control at our country's largest steel mill in the 1960s, she faced countless challenges with unwavering determination. I remember sitting at our kitchen table as a child, listening to her stories about how male workers would deliberately sabotage her inspections or leave inappropriate notes on her desk. But she never backed down. Instead, she implemented even stricter quality controls and turned her department into the most efficient one in the entire mill. This same fighting spirit never left her, even as she aged. In fact, it seemed to grow stronger with each passing year. So when our government passed that controversial law allowing pharmacists to refuse selling emergency contraceptives based on their personal beliefs, I knew my grandmother wouldn't stay quiet. I was having coffee with her when she first heard about it on the news. She sat there slowly stirring her coffee, with that look in her eyes that I knew all too well. It was the same look she had when she discovered the mill workers were trying to hide defective steel beams from her inspections. She turned to me asking how pharmacists were now being allowed to play God. When I acknowledged that it was controversial, she scoffed and stated that young girls needed protection, not judgment. That's when she told me about her plan. She was going to visit every pharmacy in our city to create what she called a conscience map for young women. But I knew her well enough to realize this was about more than just mapping. This was her way of fighting back. The next morning, she put on her best dress, the one she used to wear to important mill meetings, and began her crusade. I decided to accompany her to the first few pharmacies, partly out of curiosity and partly out of concern for her safety. The first pharmacy we visited was in the city center. The pharmacist was a young man who looked barely out of college. My grandmother boldly asked him if they sold the morning after pill. When the pharmacist awkwardly asked for clarification about which pill she meant, my grandmother loudly and unabashedly specified that she meant the pill for after sex. She even added that at 85 years old, she'd probably been having sex longer than he'd been alive. The poor pharmacist turned bright red, and I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing when he nervously explained that they didn't sell those pills due to his religious beliefs. My grandmother launched into her prepared speech. She claimed to be the leader of the local senior citizens group and explained how elderly people were their primary customers. She warned him that they were creating a list, and any pharmacy letting their conscience interfere with proper health care would find themselves with empty shelves and expired medications. The pharmacist tried to protest, but my grandmother cut him off. She told him he could stuff his mouth with potatoes and pretend to enjoy them, because they would be taking their business elsewhere. She added that once she spread the word among the senior community, he'd be selling nothing but breath mints. Over the next few months, my grandmother visited exactly 448 pharmacies. She kept meticulous records in a small notebook, creating a comprehensive list of which pharmacies would and wouldn't sell emergency contraceptives. She then shared this information with local women's rights groups and healthcare advocates. The impact was remarkable. Several pharmacies that initially refused to sell the pill changed their policies after noticing a significant drop in their elderly customers. Local news even picked up the story, dubbing my grandmother the pharmacy crusader. She never actually led any senior citizens group, but her conviction was so strong and her presence so commanding that no one ever thought to question it. She single-handedly created change by simply refusing to accept injustice, just as she had done throughout her entire life. Last week, the largest pharmacy chain in our city announced they would ensure emergency contraceptives would be available at all their locations, regardless of individual pharmacists' beliefs. When I called to tell her the news, I could hear the smile in her voice as she quipped that it turns out those potatoes didn't taste so good after all. I've been driving cabs in this city for about 7 years now. Started right after my divorce when I needed a fresh start and a way to make ends meet. The flexible hours helped me spend more time with my kids during the days I had them, and the job itself wasn't half bad. Sure, you get your share of drunk passengers and occasional non-tippers, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened last weekend. It was around 11 p.m. and I was thinking about calling it a night when I got a ping for a pickup from one of the fancier restaurants downtown. When I pulled up, I saw this woman in her mid-40s, wearing what looked like an expensive dress and carrying a large, fancy purse. She stumbled a bit getting into the cab, so I figured she'd had a few drinks. The moment she got in, I could tell this wasn't going to be a smooth ride. She immediately started complaining about the cleanliness of cabs, telling me that her last ride had been disgusting. I assured her that my cab was cleaned daily and asked for her destination. She gave me an address in the suburbs, about a 20-minute drive. When we started moving, she kept shifting around in her seat, sighing loudly, and making phone calls. She complained about the air conditioning, saying it was freezing. I adjusted the temperature, trying to stay professional, but then she immediately complained that it was too hot and questioned my ability to do anything right. I told her I would adjust it again until she was comfortable. As we drove, she kept making comments about my driving, the route I was taking, and even the music playing softly on the radio, which I turned off after her third complaint. About halfway through the ride, she started getting agitated about the fare showing on the meter. She accused me of running the meter too fast and scamming her. I tried explaining that the meter rates were set by the city and I had no control over them, but she wouldn't listen. She insisted that she took cabs all the time and that this ride never cost this much, accusing me of trying to rip her off because she'd been drinking. I attempted to explain that the rates had actually increased citywide last month, but she wasn't having any of it. She demanded that I pull over immediately, threatening to call the police and accusing me of fraud. I told her I would pull over, and she was welcome to call the police, mentioning that I had a dashboard camera recording everything and all my rates were legitimate. That's when things went completely sideways. She started screaming that I was threatening her by mentioning the camera. Then, before I could even process what was happening, she reached into her purse and pulled out what looked like a handful of small fireworks. She shouted about me threatening her and that she'd show me what she thought about that. In a matter of seconds, she lit them with a lighter she had in her other hand and threw them onto the floor of the cab. I slammed on the brakes, but she had already yanked the door open and jumped out, running down a side street. The fireworks started going off inside the cab. They weren't the big kind that shoot up in the air, but they were sparking and popping everywhere. I managed to get out and grab my fire extinguisher from the trunk, putting out the small fires that had started on the floor mats. I immediately called the police and my dispatcher. The cops arrived within minutes, and I showed them the dashboard camera footage. The crazy thing is, her purse was still in the back seat. She dropped it in her rush to get away. Inside they found her ID, more fireworks, and ironically, a receipt from the restaurant showing she'd spent over $200 on drinks. The police tracked her down within an hour. Turns out she lived in the neighborhood where we'd stopped, and she'd gone straight home thinking she'd gotten away with it. They found her still in the same dress, reeking of alcohol, trying to convince her husband that she'd been attacked by a cab driver. The responding officers arrested her on multiple charges: arson, destruction of property, public intoxication, and fleeing the scene of a crime. When they searched her house, they found a whole stash of illegal fireworks in her garage. My cab needed about $3,000 worth of repairs to fix the burned upholstery and floor, but her insurance had to cover it all. She ended up getting sentenced to 6 months in jail, 3 years of probation, and had to pay a hefty fine on top of the repairs. She also lost her job at some marketing firm when the story made local news. A few regular customers who heard about the incident through local news started the GoFundMe to help me stay afloat while my cab was being repaired. They raised enough to cover my lost wages and then some. I still drive the same route, but now I keep an extra fire extinguisher in the cab. You never know when someone's going to try to turn your back seat into their personal 4th of July celebration. After working 60-hour weeks for the past 3 years at my accounting firm, I finally decided to treat myself to something special for my 30th birthday. My best friend and I have been talking about visiting Disney ever since we both moved to Florida for work, but somehow we never found the time. The last time I went was when I was 9 years old with my parents, right before they got divorced. I remember it being magical despite everything that was happening at home, so I figured it was time to make some new memories. We arrived early in the morning, determined to make the most of our day. The lines were definitely longer than I remembered from my childhood visit, but then again, everything seems shorter when you're a kid. My friend and I discovered the single rider lanes, which was perfect since we didn't mind riding separately if it meant shorter wait times. While waiting in one of these single rider lines, I noticed something odd. A family of four, a mom, two daughters, probably around 8 and 10, and their dad, started walking through the middle of the line, all holding hands like some kind of entitled chain of people. Several people around us started getting upset. Someone near us asked them what they were doing. The mom, who I'll call Karen, casually replied that they had forgotten something on the ride and promised they'd be quick. They kept pushing through until they reached the area where single riders, fast pass riders, and the regular line all merged. That's when things got interesting. A lady behind me shouted out, demanding to know what exactly they had forgotten. The whole single rider line was furious as we realized what was happening. This woman was just trying to skip the line with her kids. My friend and I watched as they got shuffled into the pre-ride movie area before us. While waiting, all of us single riders started sharing similar stories of entitled people we'd encountered. One person mentioned how someone had tried using their kid's birthday as an excuse to cut in line the previous week. Another shared a story about someone who had pretended to be part of their group. When we finally got to the pre-ride movie area, I spotted a staff member and approached him. I described the woman with her two daughters, mentioning her pink shirt and white shorts, and explained how they had cut through the single rider line using the excuse of forgetting something. The staff member apologetically explained that since they were already in line to board, there wasn't much he could do. But karma wasn't done with them yet. When we made it to the car boarding line, guess who we saw? The same woman and her kids. I approached another employee and explained how the family had cut through the entire single rider line, mentioning that everyone had witnessed it. The employee said she would let someone know, but walked away in the opposite direction of the ride operators, which was frustrating. Then something interesting happened. One of the kids spotted their dad standing right behind my friend and me and called out to him to join them. The dad, looking completely mortified, refused to join them. He kept letting people go ahead of him, clearly embarrassed by his family's behavior. The entire line started getting louder with their complaints. People were criticizing them for setting a terrible example for their children. Others were pointing out how everyone had been waiting for hours and questioning what made this family think they were special. Some were even calling them out for lying to get what they wanted. The mom and her kids were inching closer to the front while the dad hung back, head down in shame. That's when I decided enough was enough. I asked the people in front of me if they would mind letting me speak to the ride operators, declaring that I wasn't going to let them get away with this. The people in front of me eagerly stepped aside. The mom was blocking the walkway since they were next in line. I had to tap her shoulder and ask her to move. She slid over without saying a word, probably hoping I wouldn't make a scene. I approached the ride operator and explained how this woman and her children had cut the entire line through the single rider section by claiming they had forgotten something, suggesting that they could verify this with anyone in line. The mom's face turned from smug to shocked in an instant. Another guest immediately came forward to support my story. The mom tried to defend herself by accusing both of us of lying, but she didn't count on the entire line joining in. Everyone started shouting out what they'd witnessed. The ride operator called security, and within minutes, 2 security officers arrived. After interviewing several guests in line, they escorted the mom and her kids out through a side door. The dad quietly left through the exit, probably planning to meet them outside. When they were being led out, the mom tried to claim that she had anxiety about waiting in lines and accused us all of discrimination. The security officer shut that down quickly, explaining that if she had medical concerns, guest services could have accommodated her properly, but lying and cutting in line wasn't the solution. I've been living in the United States for over 30 years now, having moved here from Taiwan in 1991. The transition wasn't easy at first. New culture, new language, new everything. But I worked hard, put myself through business school, and eventually landed a position at a prestigious consulting firm where I've been for the past 15 years. One thing that's helped me feel connected to my roots is this small family-owned Chinese restaurant in my neighborhood. I discovered it about 5 years ago when I was working late and needed a quick dinner. The couple who owns it reminded me of my parents, hardworking, dedicated, and always putting their children first. Over time, I became a regular customer, stopping by at least twice a week after work. The restaurant isn't fancy by any means. It's one of those typical hole-in-the-wall places with slightly worn-out chairs and faded photographs of dishes on the walls. But the food? It's the closest thing to my mother's cooking I've found in this city. The owners, a husband and wife team, always greet me with warm smiles, and their 2 young daughters often wave at me from their usual booth where they do their homework. Last Tuesday, I had a very long day at work. 3 back-to-back meetings with clients, followed by a presentation to the board. By 7 p.m., all I wanted was some comfort food. I headed to the restaurant still in my navy blue suit and carrying my briefcase. When I walked in, the wife was at the counter as usual. I greeted her and placed my usual order, braised pork belly with rice and stir-fried green beans. She smiled warmly and asked if I wanted extra chili sauce today. I gratefully accepted her offer. I stood near the entrance, checking some emails on my phone while waiting. The owner's daughters were in their usual spot, textbooks spread across the table. The older one was helping the younger with what looked like math homework. That's when they walked in, a group of 4, led by this woman who looked like she just stepped out of a "let me speak to your manager" convention. Without even a proper look in my direction, she raised her hand with 4 fingers up and announced that she needed a table for 4 people. I ignored her at first, assuming she was talking to someone else, but then she cleared her throat loudly and repeated her request more forcefully. I turned to face her, realizing she was actually talking to me. I politely explained that I didn't work there. She looked at me like I'd just told her the earth was flat and questioned what I meant. She insisted that she'd seen me there before. I clarified again that I was just a customer waiting for my takeout order. She became more aggressive, accusing me of lying. She claimed she'd seen me there multiple times and pointed out my suit as proof that I must be the manager. By this point, her voice was getting louder, and the other customers were starting to stare. The owner's older daughter had stopped helping with homework and was watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. I explained that I was a consultant, and that while she was right about seeing me often, it was because I was a regular customer. She became even more agitated, declaring it ridiculous. She listed her evidence: my Chinese ethnicity, my suit, and my stance near the entrance, all of which somehow proved to her that I worked there. She demanded that I stop being difficult and seat them. I responded sarcastically, asking if she thought I must work at a Chinese restaurant simply because I'm Chinese, adding a pointed comment about how we must all look alike to her. The older daughter at the homework table snorted with laughter, and her younger sister started giggling too. Just then, the owner's wife came out with my order, announcing that she had included the extra chili sauce. Karen's face turned red as realization finally dawned on her. The owner's wife looked confused at the tension in the air. The older daughter excitedly explained to her mother what had happened, how the lady had assumed I worked there just because I was Chinese. The owner's wife's expression shifted from confusion to understanding, then to barely contained anger. She turned to Karen and told her that I was one of their most valued customers. She suggested that if Karen couldn't treat their customers with respect, perhaps she should find somewhere else to dine. Karen was speechless while her companions looked mortified. One of them quickly apologized, and they practically dragged Karen out of the restaurant, her protests fading as the door closed behind them. The owner's wife turned to me with an apologetic smile and offered to give me the meal for free. I declined, explaining that I enjoyed supporting their business and joking that this would make for a great story at the office tomorrow. As I left with my food, I could hear the daughter still giggling and the younger one telling her sister that she was going to include this incident in her social studies essay about stereotypes. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.